Now, supporters of Etienne Tshisekedi, the Democratic Republic of Congo's veteran opposition leader, have gathered in the capital Kinshasa to express their shock at his death. He was a prominent opponent of successive leaders and was due to head a transitional council under a deal for President Joseph Kabila to step down. The 84-year-old died in Belgium, where he went last week for medical checks. The information minister said he would be given a state funeral. His death comes at a sensitive time for DR Congo and follows fierce clashes last year when it was announced that President Kabila would stay in power until April 2018. So how are events in the DRC likely to be affected by the death of Etienne Tshisekedi? Well, for answers to that question, I'm joined now in the studio by Vava Tampa, founder of the NGO Save the Congo and a member of the opposition in the DRC. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. So the giant figure of Etienne Tshisekedi dies. Just remind us of the legacy that he left behind.
Well, Tshisekedi essentially for 32 years of the 20th century led an opposition movement against Mobutu. He's actually widely accepted across Congo that he's the one who helped take down Mobutu. Without Tshisekedi, Laurent Kabila, the father of the current president, could not have come in the country with troops from other countries. So it has been an amazing thing, an essential opposition leader in Congo.
So to what extent might his death upset the very fragile transition process that's taking place now? Can it go on without him?
It's really difficult to say. I mean, in a nutshell, if you remember perfectly well, Kabila had already signed a separate peace deal or a separate power-sharing deal under the African Union. The reason it had given, the reason the international community forced him to sign this second peace deal or power-sharing deal with Tshisekedi was because of what Tshisekedi represents, the very fact Tshisekedi can mobilize people in Congo and across the globe. That was the reason that Kabila was forced into signing that peace power-sharing deal. Now that Tshisekedi is gone, everything is now an open-ended question. We do not know with certainty whether or not Kabila is going to follow up and honor the deal. But if history is any lesson, then definitely we know Kabila is going to attempt using every single trick on the book to frustrate the process and cling to power.
And of course, beyond being the iconic opposition leader who fought against successive leaders in the DRC, the size of him was able to pull together otherwise disparate groups, wasn't he, into some kind of unified opposition.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the transition process,
no.
It's also the very life of the opposition. How much is that now under threat?
Well, it's absolutely gone. There isn't a single figure in Congo today who could match the stature of Tshisekedi. There isn't a single individual in Congo who could do what Tshisekedi did for Congo during Mobutu. I mean, one of the first ever coalition he created was in the 1990s, called Opposition Sacrée, a Union Sacrée de l'Opposition, which essentially brought together all the key political figures and opposition groups against Mobutu. And recently, just last year in fact, he replicated the same thing, creating a rassemblement which brought together all the opposition group. And he was able to do all of that because of what he represents.
And just a moment ago, we're just watching some pictures there of people in the DRC coming together to mourn. As you pointed out there, I mean, he had this ability to mobilize lots of people in the DRC. Any word yet of a funeral date? Because that in itself could be a public event of huge political significance.
Absolutely. And so far, nothing has yet been said. We're still waiting to hear from his family.
They said it's going to be a state funeral.
Well, that's what the Congolese government says. Whether or not his family would agree to that, or whether or not his political disciples would also agree for Kabila to essentially exploit Tshisekedi's death to sort of, regain some sort of national acceptance. It's a question which we're still waiting to find out. But whatever happens, I mean, Tshisekedi is such a powerful figure that even now he's gone, he's dead, he's still going to haunt Congolese politics.
So you think his legacy, sorry to interrupt you there, I mean, could mean that the ongoing transition process could essentially move on, build on what he's already done?
Well, look, the reason we have some sort of peace and stability now is because of Tshisekedi agreed to that power-sharing deal on New Year's Eve. Without Tshisekedi agreeing to that power-sharing deal on New Year's Eve, Congo could have been on fire.
Right.
Okay. Now, whether if Kabila accepts to honor the deal, then some stability could continue.
Right.
However, if Kabila attempts to cling to power and frustrate that process, then the entire country could essentially explode.
Well, just bring us up to date with the current atmosphere in the DRC. I mean, we're looking at pictures of earlier sort of, previous demonstrations and so on. How tense are things now, following the failure of the government and the opposition to sign that deal they struck, I think, on New Year's Eve, a deal which we understand is now clearly in trouble?
Well, essentially, Kabila finds himself in a really tricky situation. Across the country, no one wants him to stay. And he has been attempting to cling to power by using his army, his private army, and by arresting people and killing people. But nonetheless, young people for the past 2 years, in fact, have been protesting. And amazingly, Tshisekedi has somehow, throughout the entire period, kept quiet. Although he has the ability to mobilize the entire country against Kabila, he wanted to address this situation diplomatically. He wanted to address it peacefully. He wanted this to be his last legacy. And he did manage to some extent to achieve it. But whether or not this legacy would succeed and continue depends on what Kabila decides to do in the days and weeks to come.
Well, we shall watch that very closely. Vava Tampa from Save the Congo, thank you very much indeed.